She said, "I'm going to the gym. Don't wait up for me." I remember those exact words because of how casually they slipped out of her mouth, how natural the lie had become on her tongue. At first, I didn't think much of it. People have routines. My wife had convinced me that fitness had become hers, and every evening after work, she'd grab her gym bag, kiss me on the cheek, and disappear for 2 or 3 hours. I had even started encouraging her, telling her I was proud she was sticking with it, that it was good for her health, that I wished I had the same dedication. She would smile, eyes shining with that performance of gratitude, and for a while I believed it all. The cruel irony is that I was the one cheering her on while she was slipping away, and I was the last to see it. It wasn't just once or twice that she claimed the gym was calling. It became 5 nights a week, then sometimes early mornings, sometimes Saturdays. Her whole life, it seemed, revolved around this new identity she'd built as someone serious about her health. She had even bought new workout clothes, flashy leggings and sports bras that arrived in unmarked packages on our porch. I remember holding them up one evening, saying she looked great in them, that I liked the way she was taking herself seriously. She kissed me again and told me she loved me for being so supportive. And yet, even then, something in the back of my mind started whispering that her affection felt scripted, almost rehearsed. I brushed it off because the alternative was too ugly to imagine. The first real crack came one Friday night. She had told me she was staying late at the gym because her trainer wanted her to try a new routine. I nodded, didn't question it, but around 9 o'clock I realized she had left her Apple Watch on the kitchen counter. That watch was her pride and joy, the way she counted calories, tracked every heartbeat. Forgetting it seemed strange. I held it in my hand and thought, if she was really at the gym, wouldn't she have noticed immediately? The seed was planted, but I wasn't ready to water it yet. A few days later, it happened again. She claimed she was exhausted from a heavy workout, but when she pulled off her sneakers in the hallway, her socks were clean, her hair perfectly styled, her perfume still intact. I remember staring at her and thinking, who comes back from 2 hours at the gym looking fresher than when they left? I asked a casual question, rough workout. And she answered with a long monologue about treadmills and elliptical machines, about how the gym was packed with people fighting for equipment. The details were too sharp, too rehearsed, like she'd been practicing her answers. I smiled, but inside my stomach twisted. It wasn't jealousy that drove me. It was the undeniable sense that I was being taken for a fool. I wanted to be wrong so badly that I told myself I was paranoid, that maybe she had just freshened up before coming home. I even convinced myself that maybe she went to the sauna after workouts, which would explain the clean socks and untouched hair. But once a suspicion takes root, it doesn't die quietly. It grows, it digs into you, and soon every little inconsistency becomes another brick on a wall you can't ignore. One night, curiosity finally tipped over into action. She left her gym bag by the door, and while she was in the shower, I opened it. Inside was a water bottle half filled, a neatly folded towel that smelled faintly of fabric softener, and a pair of sneakers so clean they could have been new. Not even a hint of sweat, no damp fabric, no trace that they had ever touched a treadmill floor. I put everything back exactly how I found it, but my hands were shaking. That was the night I stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. From then on, I started noticing the small details she didn't think about. Gas receipts in her purse from a town 20 minutes away where there was no gym she had ever mentioned. Lipstick smudged off in a way that didn't match her story of just cardio. Her sudden habit of showering before even saying hello when she returned home. And perhaps most damning of all, the way she avoided eye contact when I casually suggested joining her sometime. The panic in her voice was instant. "Oh, it wouldn't be fun for you. My workouts are intense. You'd get bored." The explanation came too fast, and her smile was brittle. Still, I hesitated. Confrontation wasn't my style, and besides, what if I was wrong? What if she truly was working out, and I was the insecure husband imagining shadows where none existed? That fear of being the crazy one kept me silent for weeks longer than I should have been. But silence doesn't erase reality. It only delays the inevitable. The turning point came when I borrowed her car one afternoon. I slid into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and saw the GPS history pop up on the screen. I hadn't even been snooping. It was just there, unavoidable. The recent destinations were a list of addresses I didn't recognize. None of them gyms, none of them fitness centers. Instead, They were quiet suburban streets, a coffee shop 2 towns over, a park near the river. My chest went cold, my hands tightened on the steering wheel, and for the first time, I couldn't deny the truth. She wasn't working out. She wasn't even trying to cover her tracks well. She was just counting on my trust to do the heavy lifting. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she scrolled her phone, pretending to be tired from lifting weights. The betrayal burned like acid in my stomach, and I knew then that I couldn't let it go. I couldn't keep pretending. Something had to break, and it wasn't going to be me. What I didn't know yet was how far I would go, how methodical, how deliberate I would become. Because when betrayal hits you like that, you either collapse under it, or you let it sharpen you into something unrecognizable. And I was about to become sharper than she could ever imagine. The night everything snapped wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even cinematic. It was quiet, almost deceptively so. She came home late again, gym bag over her shoulder, cheeks flushed, not from sweat, but from something else. I had spent the evening pacing the living room, her Apple Watch in my palm, the one she had forgotten once more. I scrolled through her workout data. Empty. No calories burned, no steps recorded, nothing. She had worn it out of the house, but turned it off almost immediately. The realization hit me like a brick. She was leaving breadcrumbs for me to follow, but only if I was brave enough to pick them up. When she walked in, I asked, "How was the gym?" She didn't flinch. She launched into another rehearsed tale about how she had pushed herself, how her legs ached from squats. I looked at her and asked, "Did your trainer say you're improving?" The hesitation was less than a second, but I saw it. Her eyes darted sideways. Then she gave me a full sentence, too long, too detailed, about posture and endurance. It was the same thing she always did, over-explained to cover the lie. I didn't confront her then. I smiled and kissed her forehead, and she relaxed instantly, like she had passed a test she didn't realize I was grading. But inside, I was boiling. That was the moment I decided I was done letting her play me for a fool. The next day, I left work early and parked her car outside the office. At 6 sharp, she came out, changed clothes in the restroom, and drove off toward her so-called gym. I followed from a distance, hands clamped on the steering wheel, heart pounding so hard I thought it would betray me. She didn't head to the gym downtown, the one she claimed was her sanctuary. Instead, she pulled into a residential neighborhood 20 minutes away. She parked casually, walked up the path, and rang a doorbell. A man opened the door, casual clothes, wine glass in hand, and she leaned in to kiss him like she had done it 1,000 times. Then she disappeared inside. I sat there in the car, shaking, every nerve in my body screaming to storm up and kick the door in. But I didn't. I forced myself to stay seated, forced myself to breathe. If I blew up now, all I would get was chaos and denials. I didn't want a screaming match. I wanted her cornered with no escape, her lies collapsing under their own weight. That was the breaking point. Watching her walk into another man's house under the excuse of going to the gym was the exact second my patience dissolved. I drove home, sat in the silence of our living room, and felt something shift inside me. I was no longer her trusting husband. I was something else entirely, something colder, more calculating. Revenge didn't just feel like an option, it felt like oxygen. For the next few days, I played my role perfectly. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, asked polite questions about her workouts in the evenings, massaged her shoulders when she claimed she was sore. And every time she spun another story, I locked it away, adding it to the arsenal I was building. I didn't confront her because I wasn't looking for honesty. I was looking for leverage. The anger grew sharper with every lie. I'd hear her say she was meeting her trainer, and my jaw would clench until my teeth hurt. I'd smell her perfume stronger than usual when she walked in the door, and I'd picture him breathing it in before me. I'd watch her take long showers and imagine his hands on her, and I'd have to stop myself from putting my fist through the bathroom door. But the longer I waited, the more clarity I had. If I screamed at her, she'd cry, manipulate, twist it back on me. If I left quietly, she'd paint herself the victim to our families. No, I needed her lies to collapse in public, under lights too bright for her to escape. I needed everyone she cared about to see the truth. One night while she slept, I downloaded a car tracking app and paired it with a small device I had picked up earlier that day. Installing it in her car was easy. She never noticed. The next week, every time she went to the gym, I watched her little dot on the map drive straight back to that man's house. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It was fact. And that's when the plan began to form. The idea came to me almost as a joke. She had spent months lying about being at the gym. So why not let the lie collapse in the most humiliating way possible? I thought about her family, the same people she constantly bragged to about her discipline, the ones she had told about her fitness journey. What if I invited them all to a family workout day? What if I made the gym her favorite alibi, the stage where her mask finally slipped? The thought filled me with a dark thrill. I pictured her face when she realized she couldn't explain why she never showed up at the place she supposedly spent half her life in. I pictured her excuses crumbling, her parents staring at her with disappointment, her siblings exchanging knowing looks. It wouldn't be a scream in the night. It would be a quiet, devastating unmasking that no one would forget. That night, I lay beside her, pretending to sleep while she texted under the covers. My mind was racing, not with pain anymore, but with strategy. I had crossed the line. I wasn't the betrayed husband anymore. I was the man planning the stage for her downfall. And I wasn't going to rush it. I was going to savor it. I started small and stayed painfully practical, because when you're angriest, it's easy to make mistakes that ruin everything. And I wanted this to be clean, undeniable, and utterly humiliating in the most civilized way possible. The plan had to be simple enough that no one could dismiss it as a bitter stunt, and precise enough that every lie she had told about the gym would peel away on its own, without me saying a single devastating word in front of the people she cared about. I thought about what she loved to perform for other people, her fitness story, her discipline, the way she always showed photos of her new workout clothes and posted motivational blurbs with filtered sunrise images, and I decided to weaponize that performance. If she had turned the gym into her identity, then I would turn the gym into the place where her identity collapsed in front of everyone she used it to impress. I called the manager of the boutique gym she claimed to attend and asked for a private consultation, speaking in a tone that sounded casual and friendly while I measured every syllable, making sure I offered no clue that anything was wrong. I want to organize a family wellness day, I said in a voice designed to be warm and unremarkable, the kind of voice you use when you want someone to take you seriously without raising suspicion. My wife has been so committed to fitness lately, and she's been encouraging the rest of the family to join her. I thought a one-day program would be a great way to get everyone involved. The manager asked for details, and I gave them a Saturday slot, the main studio reserved for a group circuit led by their best trainer, light refreshments, and a sign-up list. I asked for a discounted family package and a flyer the gym could print because I wanted something tangible to hand out. The manager, pleased to land a small corporate event, agreed and asked if I wanted their head trainer to lead the session and perhaps say a few words about commitment and accountability. I said yes, and then made a mental note that a talk about consistency would be the most delicious cruelty. When the trainer and I met, I played the part of the supportive husband perfectly. I sat across from him in the office, folded my hands, and said in a tone that assumed the simplest, most honorable of motives, "My wife has been a real inspiration to our family. She's been working out consistently, and people are responding to her energy. I want to create a day where she can show everyone what she's achieved and get them excited to start their own routines." The trainer, pleased and professional, asked if I wanted him to speak about how to turn exercise into a habit, how to set realistic goals, and how to avoid the usual excuses people make. Make it motivational, I said, and I meant every word, because I wanted that rhetoric to hang heavy in the room when she had no answers to match it. Make it about discipline, about showing up, I told him, and he nodded, not understanding that the words he would use as inspiration would soon be used as evidence of her failure. I bought memberships for her parents, for her sister, for the cousin she always posted photos with, for the in-laws she liked to impress. One by one, I completed the paperwork and paid the fees, telling each that it was a gift from her because she'd been talking about bringing the family together. I wrote the invitations in my own hand and dropped them in the mail with a polite RSVP card. Join us for a family wellness day. Saturday, 10 a.m. Crystal Studio. Trainer-led circuit, refreshments afterwards. Please RSVP. We want to celebrate her dedication. I mailed some invites and hand-delivered others, and when cousins called to ask who was organizing it, I answered as if the idea had come entirely from her enthusiasm and that this day was meant to highlight the progress she'd been making. When relatives thanked me for the opportunity, I replied in long sentences filled with casual compliments about her leadership, because I wanted them to arrive expecting to see the woman they already thought she was, the tireless, fit, committed gym-goer who had been pulling her family toward healthier lives. At the same time, I tightened the surveillance I had started because the plan depended on her not being there, and I needed hard proof when the room turned. The small tracker in her car sent me ping after ping, timestamps and addresses, tiny betrayals mapped out by latitude and longitude, and I archived every single location with a neat, merciless precision. I printed receipts and timestamps. I made a timeline on a sheet of paper with neat columns that showed where she said she would be and where she actually went, and then I took the next step that would make the revenge satisfyingly irreversible. I arranged for the trainer to open the event with a talk about consistency, about the social pressure to perform, and I arranged for a moment in the schedule where the host would ask, in front of everyone, whether the person who had inspired the event would like to say a few words. I knew exactly how the sequence would land, and I practiced my part in my head. Calm, measured comments that sounded loving and proud, paired with a question that would be an invitation and a trap in equal measure. In the week before the event, I kept my performance impeccable. I let her brag in texts about how excited she was to bring everyone. I liked her posts of her leggings and made the right noises when she joked about how disciplined she had become, and I even suggested we cook something light for the post-workout refreshments so it would look like she was managing the details. Each time she raved about a new set or a new trainer move, I added it to my internal record, and each time she told one of her performative stories to friends or family, I subtly reinforced it in private conversation. She's been so committed, I would say in a long, sincere sentence when her mother called about logistics, and the mother would sigh with pride, the kind of pride that makes people believe the image they already enjoy. The more invested the family became, the clearer the stage would be. On the night before the event, I prepared the small things that would let the truth speak for itself without my voice rising. I placed printed RSVP cards in envelopes with exact times circled. I set up the small projector to run an innocuous slideshow of what consistency looks like while the trainer spoke, and I printed a sheet for the trainer to read containing a short, encouraging paragraph about accountability. 3 long lines about how showing up is the hardest part and how people often talk about being busy when the real reason is avoidance. I handed that sheet to the trainer with a smile and said, "Say this at the beginning. People need to hear it from a professional." He read the paragraph aloud the next morning without realizing it had been chosen to sting. There was a final practical move I made because I knew women like her have patterns and patterns have weak points. I messaged her sister with a long, warm text about how excited I was to see the whole family, how wonderful it would be to have everyone together for something the sister had mentioned a few times, and I closed the message with a casual, almost offhand suggestion that the sister remind my wife in the morning to bring her water bottle and towel. The sister sent back a string of heart emojis and a promise, and in that promise lay the last thread I needed to pull. The setup was complete, an event framed as her idea, a trainer ready to speak about discipline and consistency, a room full of family who believed her narrative, and a timeline of proof that would hang around her like a noose when she arrived with no answers. I remember lying awake the night before the workout day, thinking of all the little hypocrisies she'd used to build her image, the way she'd polished the story until the mirror reflected only what she wanted to see. I told myself I wasn't doing this to be cruel for cruelty's sake. I was doing it to expose the gap between someone's online performance and their real life. And in the quiet hours, I walked through every possibility of how she might respond, every way she might try to spin an explanation. I planned for excuses, for tears, for rage. I planned for everything and hoped she would be unprepared, because the best revenge is the kind that leaves no room for a comeback. The plan was not about destroying her beyond repair. It was about creating a moment where the truth was visible to the people who had allowed her performance to flourish uncontested. I wanted her to stand in a room full of her family, to hear a trainer talk about the value of showing up, to feel the pressure of expectation, and to realize, in the coldest possible way, that she had been living inside a story built on nothing more than carefully spun lies. I wanted her to feel the weight of the image she had curated fall away, because falling apart in private is one thing, But falling apart where everyone already believes you is a humiliation that cannot easily be erased. When the morning came, I would be calm and ordinary and full of the same supportive phrases people had come to expect from me. And then, when the trainer asked, would the person who inspired this family to come forward like to say a few words? I would smile in a way that did not need to ask anything, and I would watch the space open for her and for the truth. She arrived 15 minutes late, hair freshly combed, makeup perfect, and smiling in a way that tried too hard to fit the room. And the moment she stepped through the studio door, the air tightened like a string pulled taut, because everyone had been waiting to celebrate her, and she had built that celebration herself with every flattering post and every casual boast about how dedicated I am. So when she smiled and offered a long, practiced sentence about how she was thrilled to see everyone there and how proud she was that the family was taking a step toward health, that smile began to crack under the weight of expectations I had quietly arranged to press down on her. And the first sound that cut across the room was not mine, but the trainer's voice, clear and professional, speaking in deliberate paragraphs about the value of showing up, about the difference between saying you will commit and putting your body where your words are, about how people consistently tell themselves stories to avoid the discomfort of discipline. And as he described in long, unhurried sentences the way people manufacture excuses and confuse intention with action, I felt the lightness of the crowd shift towards something colder, watching her like a weather report that had suddenly turned to storm. I remember the exact rhythm of what happened next because I had practiced it in my head until the cadence felt inevitable. And when the trainer finished his talk, he made an almost offhand comment about how meaningful it is when a single member of a family takes the lead and inspires others. So he asked in a kind voice, the kind trainers use when they want to encourage everyone to speak from the heart, whether the person who had inspired the event would like to say a few words. And that was the moment I watched her face change from practice cheer to a flicker of something fast and animal, an intake of breath that was unmasked panic. And she opened her mouth to say something long and carefully constructed about gratitude and community, but could not find the thread because for the first time in months her story was unstitched by a room full of people who believed it and expected its performance. She tried to speak in full sentences, telling them in a long, measured explanation about how she had been training and how she had organized this because she wanted to give back, and the words came out smooth at first, but when the trainer, with the professional candor he'd been coached to display, asked where she trained and whether the family could come to watch a typical session, the smile on her face drained from the edges, and she gave a circular answer in which she named the downtown studio she had always claimed to go to and described imaginary classes and a trainer she had invented with so many particulars that the room should have nodded along. But there was a small, heavy silence under the polite applause because I had already clicked the remote in my hand, and the first slide of the innocuous, what consistency looks like slideshow came up on the projector behind her. A clean timeline I had printed and arranged with a series of dates and addresses, and every entry a little, undeniable nail in the coffin of her story, and the room shifted its attention from her lips to the blocky, cold letters of the facts, and I watched her try to read the room and fail. I stood and walked to the front in the same slow, ordinary way I had rehearsed, hands loose at my sides, my voice even and neither accusing nor pleading, the sort of voice people trust because it does not flare with emotion but carries an undertow of control. And when I set the printed timeline on the trainer's table and said in a long sentence that I thought it might be helpful for everyone to see the literal pattern of how things had been going, because sometimes numbers and locations can clarify what anecdotes cannot, the room leaned forward as if to catch a different kind of truth. Her sister reached for her water bottle and froze like she had been mid-step in some private choreography, and she mouthed a question without sound, but I did not answer because I wanted the evidence to speak for itself. I asked the trainer, speaking in extended sentences that described what the printout was without embellishment, to show the map of locations I had printed and to read aloud the addresses and timestamps that corresponded to the dates she had told us she'd been at the gym. And as the trainer read each line in a professional, uninflected tone, March 3rd, 10:21 a.m., Residential Street. March 10th, 5:45 p.m., Cafe 2 towns over. April 1st, 7:15 p.m., private address on Cedar Lane. I watched her face attempt to compose itself around explanations she had not prepared because the GPS pings on the sheet lined up like a ledger that refused to be negotiated with. And when the trainer drew a finger down the list and said in a quiet, long sentence that consistency required showing up in the same place if one claimed to be training there, the room grew heavy with the kind of attention that will not be soothed by charm. She reached then for the pattern she always used when cornered. Lengthy descriptions delivered in measured cadences that conflated aspiration with accomplishment, stories about feeling better, about walking more, about doing cardio when I can. And she added long clauses about traffic and work and how trainers sometimes change the schedule unexpectedly. But every answer was an attempt to paper over dates and addresses that were already printed and spread across the trainer's small table. And when she tried to redirect by mentioning a class she once attended at the downtown studio, everyone listened politely until I asked, in a voice that was long and laden with the kind of weary patience that makes other people feel foolish for interrupting, whether she would like to explain why the GPS data showed her arriving at a private residence 15 to 20 minutes into her supposed workouts on 3 separate occasions. And because the question was not loud, it landed with the precision of a scalpel, and she crumpled inward like fabric pulled too tight. She began to offer reasons in one long, continuous breath that tried to stitch explanation to image. She said she had been stopping to pick up a package. She said she had been running errands. She said sometimes people she met at the park asked if she wanted coffee. She said she was ashamed to admit she had been stressed and had taken walks with a friend to talk through things. And each sentence she built carried the flavor of improvisation because none of those stories matched the steady, specific timestamps I had laid out. And when a cousin who had been watching her for years asked in a long, incredulous string of words whether she had told people these things before and why she had never invited them to join, she began to cry in the way people cry when their narrative collapses and they realize that the story they curated is no longer theirs to control. Her cries were long and layered. She spoke at length about guilt and confusion, about how hard it had been to say things aloud. But then she made the mistake habitual liars make, that of turning the facts into feelings in an attempt to elicit sympathy. And when she said in an elongated, pleading sentence that she had simply wanted a private place to breathe and that she had not meant to hurt anyone, a voice from the back of the room, her father's voice, measured and heavy with disappointment, spoke up in a paragraph-long question that was not a defense, but an inquiry into character, asking calmly, and without the sharpness of rage, whether the person who inspired the day would be willing to accept help instead of hiding. And that question carried the weight of family expectation more than any accusation I could have made. She tried to salvage the situation with a long, rambling account of stress at work and an unnamed friend who had helped her, and her sentences tangled and doubled back on themselves until she stopped making sense, because people can only weave flimsy fabric for so long before it tears when held up to the light of evidence. And then she did something small and foolish. She accused me of orchestrating the whole thing, and she said it in an extended, venom-laced paragraph about manipulation and cruelty and how I had betrayed her trust. And for a beat the room buzzed with the electricity of a counterattack. But I had already anticipated that move, and I remained calm. And I said in a measured, almost gentle monologue that I had only wanted the family to see what she often spoke about, and to be honest with each other about the difference between saying you will change and actually taking the steps to do so. And when I slid across the table the printed photographs I had taken, images of her at the back door of a house with a man's shadow crossing the frame, timestamps distinct and irrefutable, there was a different kind of collapse in her face because this was not just about excuses or avoidance. This was about being lied to in a way that used the trust of family as camouflage. The room held its breath as she looked at the photographs in long, silent gulps, and she made one final, long speech that attempted to soft-pedal everything by invoking loneliness and the inadequacy of our marriage and the complexity of human desire, and she asked in lengthy, winding sentences for forgiveness in a tone so practiced that it sounded like a script read from someone trying desperately to convince themselves first, and then everyone else, that there was an explanation, but the family had already changed. Pride and disappointment, and that peculiar animal need to align with truth had overtaken their willingness to accept her image without proof. And her sister, speaking in a paragraph full of disbelief and long, patient anger, said she would not stand for being lied to while being held up as an example. And the way her voice rolled through the room made the humiliation deep and public in the way I had planned it to be, because it was not a spectacle staged by anger but a quiet revelation revealed by documentation and calm. She left the gym that afternoon in a long, panicked monologue filled with apologies and promises she would never keep. And as she descended the street saying in a continuous, frantic string of words that she would make it right, and that she was sorry, and that perhaps we could all talk later in private. Her steps were heavy with the knowledge that while lies can be maintained in the privacy of bedrooms and phones, when they are illuminated in a room full of witnesses they fray, and the execution of the plan closed with the soft, terrible sound of someone who had tried to live inside a story, finally meeting the hard light of the world outside it. The days after the workout day felt like stepping into a world that was the same on the surface. Same coffee cups, same light through the blinds, same bills in the mail. Yet everything moved a degree slower, as if the air itself had learned to be more cautious around us. There were family messages that came at odd hours, long texts from relatives who had been at the gym that day asking questions in long, careful paragraphs about feelings and logistics, and there were phone calls that lasted an hour because people wanted to speak without an audience and to stitch explanations together with their voices. She left that evening with a duffel bag and a string of promises that came out in an almost continuous, trembling stream about counseling and personal work, about needing to figure herself out, and about how ashamed she was that she had let things go so far. And I listened to her speak in those long sentences because I wanted to hear the way she would try to rewrite what had happened, even while I knew the written record could not be unsaid. And when she said in a long, quavering voice that she had never intended to hurt anyone, and that she had been drowning in a fog of her own making, I felt a cold clarity that was not cruelty so much as the sober recognition that the thing I had set in motion had succeeded exactly as intended, while also doing things I had not planned for. People chose sides in the quieter weeks that followed, not with the blunt force of scandal, but with the slow, deliberate distancing that leaves fractures in places you cannot easily see. Her mother called less, and when she did, the conversations were long and hesitant, full of questions that circled around the word why, like predators around prey, seeking purchase in explanations that never fully arrived. And her sister, who had stood up that afternoon with a paragraph-long speech about dignity and honesty, texted in an even, long message saying she needed time because trust, once reshaped into suspicion, does not simply revert. And in that measured need for space, I saw the cost of my public unmasking. Relationships that had been warm enough to protect her image suddenly reconfigured themselves around the facts. And while that meant my version of the truth was vindicated in the clear eyes of those who had once believed her, it also meant that those same people began to see me as the architect of a humiliation they had not expected to witness up close. There were consequences I had anticipated and consequences I had not. The anticipated consequences. She moved into her sister's house for a few weeks. Therapy appointments were scheduled and canceled, and then rescheduled, and awkward dinners turned into one-word texts and then ceased entirely. Unfolded as if on cue, but the unanticipated ones crept up like aftershocks that revealed new fissures in my own life. Friends of ours who had been casual observers now treated me with a quiet, wary respect that left me awkward because they were not looking at me the way they had before, and the silence at neighborhood gatherings had a different texture, the kind that suggests people are aligning themselves morally even when those alignments make conversation impossible. I had not expected to feel lonelier in victory than I had ever been in the months of suspicion. It was a strange, hollow sensation to be correct, and yet to realize that being right had a price measured in human distance. One afternoon, about a month after the event, her father came by and stayed longer than I expected, and he spoke in long, slow phrases that did not resemble accusation so much as an attempt to understand the man who had orchestrated such a public reckoning. He asked, in a paragraph that unraveled slowly and carefully, why I had chosen the gym as the place, and whether I had considered other ways to handle it that might have kept the matter private, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had watched both his daughter and his son-in-law unravel, and who did not want to take pleasure in either outcome. I answered him in sentences that were measured and long because I wanted my words to be precise. I said that I had thought about speaking privately, about confronting with proof in a closed room, but that I had feared the theater of denial and manipulation in the way that private confrontation could be spun into a story where I was the villain and she the sympathetic, flawed heroine. I told him that I wanted a space where facts could be seen plainly by the family she had impressed, and that seeing them would be cleaner than 1,000 whispered arguments. And when he listened, he closed his eyes and breathed in a long, slow way, and then told me quietly, in a paragraph full of the weary patience of a man who had loved both of us at different times, that truth may be restorative, but it is also a blade, and healing is the slow work that follows the cut. There were practical ripples to manage. Joint accounts were separated with careful paperwork and long, polite emails that defined terms in legal phrasing, and our social calendar collapsed into a set of necessary calls because both of us had to explain, in extensive, careful notes, to people who had been background characters suddenly thrust into the foreground. I found myself repeating, in long sentences, what had occurred and why I had done what I did, not to justify myself, but because people needed words to hold the story together, and each recitation made the wound feel a little more real because saying it aloud meant acknowledging that a marriage had shifted from private pain to public business. There were nights I spent scrolling through the messages people had left, long paragraphs that praised me, long paragraphs that condemned me, and every voice lodged in my head like a different temperature of truth, making me acutely aware that the story I had told the family was only one thread in an unspooling tapestry. Satisfaction arrived like a small, curious thing and did not feel like the fireworks I had imagined. The first time I allowed myself to feel it fully was when her sister, in a long, unexpected text that read like a conversation in slow sentences, thanked me for being honest, and said that sometimes people shield loved ones from truth until it becomes a favor that harms them more than protects them. And reading those words, I felt a lightness that was more practical than emotional, the kind that settles in your chest when you know the facts are on your side and that the record will stand if needed. Yet even as that lightness warmed me, the sense of being alone within my own correctness remained, and there were evenings when I would stand by the window and think in long loops about how turning a private betrayal into a public reckoning had given me relief, but at the cost of scenes I would not be able to unsee, like the look on her face when the photographs were laid out, or the way her apologies came in long, rehearsed parabolas that no one could trust. In quieter moments, I allowed myself to examine whether the revenge had satisfied something deeper than hurt, whether it was the need to reclaim dignity or the hunger to be seen as someone who would not be taken for a fool again. And those reflections did not resolve into a neat paragraph because human motives rarely do. They came as a long, stubborn coil of mixed feelings that included relief, regret, and a faint, persistent echo of compassion for the woman who had been both performer and prisoner in her own narrative. I admit now that I found a cold joy in watching her world tilt and in seeing that the armor of curated identity could be pierced by the simple weight of facts. But I also discovered a disquiet I had not anticipated. Humiliation, even when deserved in my eyes, is a heavy thing to put on another person, and power used to reveal truth can also be the force that fractures more than the liar alone. Months later, we sat across from each other at a mediator's table in a room with neutral light and polite, empathetic language, and we spoke in long declarative sentences about what we wanted next, not as absolutes, but as logistical steps. Some shared custody of pets, a schedule for dividing belongings, agreed-upon boundaries for contact, and a slow, deliberate detachment that felt oddly adult and necessary. In that space, where the personal had turned legal and sentences were protocols rather than punches, I felt a sense of completion that was different from the adrenaline I had felt in the planning stages. It was quieter and more human, a practical ending to a chapter that had once felt like the end of everything. If someone asks me now whether I would do it again, I will answer in longer sentences than I once would have, because the question is not one that can be answered with a single angry syllable. I would say that I regret some of the edges, how publicness can scar people in ways that private conversation might not. But I do not regret exposing the truth because living inside a lie had been a slow theft of my life, and truth reclaimed some portion of the time and dignity she had taken. I have not become a man who enjoys making others suffer. I have become a man who knows how to hold evidence like a light and how to use that light to end a performance that was eating away at us. I have also learned, painfully and in long, careful breaths, that revenge is never entirely clean. It clears one thing while scattering others, and the space left behind is where repair must begin if there is to be anything resembling peace.